Hello, and welcome to Electrifying Growth, a podcast brought to you by Edison Partners. I'm Chris Sugden, the managing partner here at Edison and your host. There are moments in a person or company's journey that are undeniably electric. The spark or sparks, if you will, that propel you or your company to new heights. With Electrifying Growth, we're here to have in-depth, real conversations with great leaders who have been there and done it before. Edison has been investing in high-growth technology companies for more than 35 years, and I have been here at Edison doing this investing piece for more than 20 years. We've led over 225 investments. We understand that it takes great leaders and visionaries to build market leaders. We are your support system, a CEO and management's entourage, if you will. Let's introduce this episode's guest.
This episode is slightly different because we have two guests, Jim Dicso and Patrick O'Keefe. Jim Dicso is the founder and managing partner of Shoreline SAAS Advisory. He was at the forefront of driving growth and operational excellence at companies like Sunday Sky and MicroStrategy. We are excited to have him on to share his approach to blending vision with hands-on operations to help companies maximize their potential. In our experience, this is often the biggest obstacle to scalable growth, true understanding, and the ability to reach potential. Patrick O'Keefe is the founder of Moher Advisory. He specializes in advising high-growth tech firms and has an impressive track record of helping companies navigate growth challenges and seize opportunities. In our conversation, you'll learn how to stay competitive in a constantly and rapidly evolving market and how to build sustainable growth.
Jim Dicso and Patrick O'Keefe, welcome to Electrifying Growth. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Chris.
So our second voyage with two guests at once, two folks who I think are tops in their game of quote unquote go-to-market, or as many would call it, sales and marketing. I also know both of you on a personal level. Well, we won't talk college hoops because, well, Villanova's had a couple of trophies. Neither Villanova or Michigan State are knocking it out of the park quite yet. We'll see. But if those are the listening audience here, Patrick's got to give the shout out on his pullover. These two guys are both Villanova grads and proudly so. Like I said, we may talk a little college hoops, but rather than that right away, let's just get a little bit. I read your bios so folks know kind of a little bit of been there, done that, if you will, but maybe a little bit what they don't know. Did you always think you were going to be sales leaders, CEOs that had a real go-to-market focus? When I throw that first at Patrick and then let Jim come in behind on that question of kind of what's not in your bio, how did you get to where you got?
Yeah, no, I was convinced that I was going to be a titan on Wall Street. And then the 1991 recession hit and they weren't hiring, but insurance is always hiring. So I was able to kind of get in with a small little startup called Oxford Health Plan. So that kind of started the process. But no, I thought, hey, I'm going to be a financial wizard. It should have indicated to me when I really didn't do well in any of my math classes that piece of it was probably not going to be my future. But I was social chair of my fraternity. So I probably should have realized earlier. So,
Jim, how about you?
Yeah, so I was an electrical engineer by education. I knew for a fact I did not want to be an electrical engineer by vocation. So when I thought about different avenues, sales was attractive because if you're doing sales right, you're basically doing problem solving, and engineering is all about problem solving. So my dad was in a sales profession with an engineering background. And so I got my start selling copiers. And my friends all got a kick out of the fact that I went and got an engineering degree to sell copiers.
So what's funny about this, and I didn't say it to open, is we thought about a topic and how we're going to kind of label this out there in the world. So, taking sales from art to a machine or making sales into an engineered machine. And here you are, an engineer. So, but like others, when they hear I was an auditor to start my career, it just shows you never know where you start, probably isn't where you're going to end. But at the same time, I grew up in a sales household. My dad was sales first and owned his own business, but it was really manufacturer's rep. And I learned early, nothing happens without the first sale or any sale. So I have a lot of respect for, frankly, professionals like you guys in terms of making it happen, as they say. I know I'm preaching to the choir, of course.
one of the best salespeople I ever hired, I was interviewing him and I said, well, why do you want to be in sales? And he said, you know what? My dad is the best fireman in New York City. But do you know what? He gets paid the exact same as the worst fireman. And I want to be in sales because I want to be rewarded for my effort and my work and my results. And I was like, hired.
Coin operated, baby. Love it. And so I think that to sort of kick off the discussion and kind of what we do, what we see in our world, you both have had opportunities to work with founders. And most of the time, Edison's investments come behind founders who have bootstrapped their business. Yes, there's a management team, but quite often, if they have a CRO, that's a shock. But if they do, it's an inflated title. They have a VP of sales that's often the best sales guy or gal. But the founder's kind of the superhero salesperson. And sort of we're coming in there, even with some impressions that salespeople, we kind of talked about this at a pre-call, like they have lunches and do fun things, but are they really, helpful? So I'll throw this to Jim first to talk about when you first meet a founder, kind of the approach of, we have a deal we just closed. And that was maybe that's a good example where it was a surprisingly easy that he knew he had stuff to do. But just talk about that founder mentality and the what got you here cliche won't get you there as well, kind of ties into this question.
Yeah. Yeah, I always like to ask a foundational question to anybody when I first meet them and they're questioning what role I can play to help their business. And I always ask the question, do you view sales as an art or a science? And most folks who've started companies come from a more of the technical background, right? They had the idea, they built the first product, they know how to sell the product from like the perspective of they built it so they really understand it at the nuts and bolts level.
Features, functions.
And then they've hired some salespeople and have had some success, but you look at it and there's no two deals look alike, no two processes look alike. And so the natural answer from a CEO is it's an art, of course. And I said, well, I would disagree. And I'd say it's, certainly there is some art, but I would say it's a majority science. And most founders actually want to get to a science because they come from a technical background and they recognize the value of following a process and being repeatable, being scalable, but they don't know how to get there because it looks like art with the people that they have on the team. So that then becomes the conversation about how do you build the science and then give people the ability to bring their personality and their own style to the equation to add the art. But it's within a kind of a scientific process or a repeatable, scalable, machine-driven process, let me call it.
Would you say, on balance, they're receptive to that, these founder CEOs, or would you say you got a lot of selling, no pun intended, to do?
Yeah, almost exclusively, I love the idea. I have no idea how to do it myself. So if it's possible, I want it, and I appreciate the fact that you can help me get it.
Patrick, because I've read in your bio, but I think Zealous is such a special company. I'll say it like 10 times in this call. Zealous, CELIS is an amazing win. You walked in a sales culture, which is kind of interesting, but at the same time, it was a superhero culture, right? And you have other experiences besides Zealous, but maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think Jim nailed it. The two things I would add to Jim's solid explanation of how that conversation starts is one, usually the sales team adopts the personality of the founder, which in many ways can be great, but is a very narrow aperture. When you get into sales, you kind of got to be everything to everybody in a way. So that's, one of the things that you just have to adopt. The second is because there's their hero mentality, they usually have a model that the salesperson does everything. So from cold calling to the follow-up to make their PowerPoints. And that model works well at the smaller scale. But what you begin to realize is when you have a talented sales team, there are necessary steps of the sales process that Jim lays out, but not all of it has to be done by the salesperson. And quite candidly, it's an inefficient use of resources. And at the same time, what I found was when I had 6 salespeople filling out the same RFP, I got 6 different answers, which is never really good to have in the marketplace. So I think the conversation usually with the founder is one of great respect. I can't do what they did. I am not an entrepreneur. I don't have that level of courage, that level of stomach acid. But when you say to them, this is what you've done incredibly well, but for us to really move it to the next level, here are the things that have to change and stay respectful of the past, but move it. Usually they are accepting of it. They'll kind of look over your shoulder in those early stages, but as you build success, that usually they begin to relent and allow you really to kind of move forward.
Oh my God. So Patrick, now I'm a founder. I just heard, you're telling me I need to spend more money. I have to grow some kind of marketing function. This all sounds like a big black hole of cost. How does that conversation go when they start to hear we're going to build different functions And Jim, you can play on that too, I'm sure.
Usually what I would say is, look, we're not going to go do all that day one. What we're going to do is as the scale builds, as the volume builds, there are natural breakpoints where you'll inject that resource. So I'm not asking for $1 million today, but what I would say is let's look at some of the lowest value time. Now, again, I could hire somebody for $85,000 to do this, or we could hire 2 more salespeople. Usually their answer is just keep hiring salespeople. And that's not scalable. It's not an efficient use. So it's really laying out to them a model, back to Jim's point, of where and why you're going to add resources, how you will evaluate if those resources are successful. And sometimes it's not. But the laying out of the plan and the willingness to accept review is usually successful.
Now, Jim, is this going to take a long time? I'm hearing now you're going to spend some money. Okay, you're giving me comfort. You're not going to spend money until we see proof points. Fine, Patrick, thank you. But Jim, oh my God, this sounds like it's going to take a long time. I want to see results tomorrow. I'm out there knocking down sales every day. And I know we're not in pure startup land, but that 10 million going to 20 and then 50 land where they're used to kind of moving the needle every day. But we also know, to your point, it's not scalable. So talk a little bit about how do you convince them?
Yeah, 2 things you want to, at least from my standpoint, right? First is let's not break what's currently working, because there are some things that are working that are getting you to a certain level. But I think if we look at the metrics together and we identify the velocity and the win rates and the scalability of what you're doing, as long as there's a recognition that change is needed to support where you're headed, then let's first start by documenting the playbooks for what we want the first level execution to look like. So let's pick a stage of the sales process. Let's not try and boil the whole sales process down. Let's get stage 1 of the sales process where you're trying to get qualification and you're trying to do discovery to find pain. Let's nail that. What are the questions that need to get answered? Let's make it consistent that we need to answer these 10 questions in the early stages of the sales process. And if the answers are in bucket A, this is a great prospect. If they're in bucket B, it's an average prospect. And if they're in bucket C, we should not be wasting sales resources on these opportunities, because that's where you find a majority of your problem is you have salespeople that have fallen in love with deals that are going to continue but never advance. So if you can get that playbook right and you get everybody then running the play, that first play successfully, then you're at least on the right path. You say, okay, now let's work on the playbook for the next set of plays for stage 2 of the sales process, where we're trying to validate that our solution is the best alternative, and we want to set competitive traps. So what are the plays we want to run for stage 2? And so if you do it that way, you're getting consistency, you're getting buy-in on the journey. You're focusing on things that'll move the needle, because if you're moving the needle on identifying pain, even if you're late stage sales process, you could still go back and ask some of these questions to improve the likelihood that you win from things that they should have done a month ago in the earlier stage of the sales process. So that's my experience, is if you can get playbooks documented with wins, then those wins build the confidence to want to do the next set of playbooks to get the next set of wins. And then once you're winning, then it's a lot easier to get the team to make change. Yeah.
So go, Patrick, back to you. We've got this discussion. We've convinced the founder. We're in there now. We've hired one of you guys, or frankly, someone more junior to you, but someone who looked like you guys in the early days of your sales leadership. But we agree we had some plays, but we agree we need some process, but there's actually not, we find out there's not a CRM system or it's not being used. So maybe just some fundamentals around, I'd say data and infrastructure, but the value of having a true foundation to build from. And I know you both have opinion about that, but Patrick, go to you first.
And I'm going to kick it off, but I'm going to defer to the engineer. I mean, economics majors shouldn't decide this kind of stuff. I was listening to Jim and I was reminded, it's that how did the end come? It was slowly, then suddenly. Many times you've sat through those pipeline calls where you could just hear the person rooting for the deal. And meanwhile, it's like the deal's dead. So I think Jim's right. I think Jim probably can speak to it better. What we used at Zealous was kind of a double overlay. So we had built into our CRM system very defined stages and very defined characteristics and things that needed to be done in each stage. So it can't move from 10 to 25 because I think so. And it can't move from 50 to 75 until the contract has been prepared and there's red. So it's a very mechanical piece. What that doesn't tell you is it may have gotten to red lines, but did you understand the buying process? So then what we would overlay was a C minus, a C, or C plus, meaning, am I competitive, equal competitive to either their existing model or the competition? C minus, I'm at a deficiency, or C plus. So when you use those two, one was the mechanical, are all the pieces in place, and then the competitive. But sometimes we had great finalist presentations that would trigger a certain rating, but coming out, we were C minus. So that was great. You did the finalist presentation. I've got a lot sitting in that pipeline, but if it's all C minus, that's a real negative. So those two overlays helped give a better perspective on that use of data to try to understand where you are.
Yeah. So first of all, the stages and gating criteria, having removing subjectivity from whether or not this is we're in the discovery phase or we've got pain confirmed. Once pain's confirmed, then you're in the solution phase, and then you have to have solution confirmed. So, and there's a very specific rubric to say whether or not you've met that criteria. It facilitates a more disciplined view of the funnel and where you are in the funnel. And then also, the likelihood of something closing, certainly the later it gets, the better. However, I also use something called MEDDIC, which is something that I was part of the team that developed at PTC back 20 plus years ago. MEDDIC is basically, it's the metrics, economic buyer, decision criteria, decision process, identified pain, and champion. At the M is metrics. So those are the business case elements that justify investing in a product. E is the economic buyer. The definition of the economic buyer is the individual who has discretionary access to budget.
To actually sign the contract, if you will, or who close to it.
Yeah, but it's he or she is the one that can pull budget from another project to your project if it's an unbudgeted initiative. Third is decision criteria. That's the commercial, technical, political criteria that determines what's the criteria to make the decision. Then you have the process. Is it a committee? Is it we're going to run an RFP process? Is it that we're going to run a pilot? So what's the process that you'll use? I is the identified pain. If there's no pain, then it's a nice to have solution. If there's pain that has to get solved, then it's a must use solution. And then finally, the C is champion. And the champion is somebody that has power and a personal win and wants you to win because you winning helps them achieve their personal goals. And we've always said, no champion, no deal, no pain, no need.
Do you think MEDDIC is for more of an enterprise defined as a six-figure deal or better? Can it go down to the mid-market or long tail? Is a rubric that works no matter what size deal now we're in the tactics a little bit, but I think our audience enjoys is good stuff.
So my personal opinion is you have to have pain to have a reason to buy something. You need a champion to want you to win. The smaller the company, the likelihood that the champion and the economic buyer are the same person is the reality. The smaller the company, the decision process is one or two people. The decision criteria is usually it's not well defined. Like they haven't written a specific criteria rubric, but they know more about why they want to do something because they're closer to the coalface. And the business case is really, can this make my team more effective is oftentimes what they're looking at. So the smaller the company, like MEDDIC still exists, but the way you think about it is it's less sophisticated. The larger the opportunity, the more political the sales process, the more politics go. Just simple example, Pat, you referenced earlier the RFP. I've been in companies, my last company for 13 years, and we got 0 unsolicited, unexpected RFPs because we were in demand creation selling. So RFPs sometimes were created, but it was a procurement exercise, not a decision-making exercise.
It came after someone said, oh, wait, this could be cool.
Exactly. And so like in that scenario, We helped write the RFP, and it was written for us, and whoever was invited to a procurement process, not a decision process.
We used to, we still do, I guess, to some degree. And I say we used to, our Edison Edge team, and I will say to a CEO or head of sales, if you're not writing the RFP, you've already lost. Or some input on asking the right questions, right?
Right. Or if you propose a change to either the process or the criteria and it shows up, then you know you have influence.
Yeah.
If you recommend a change and they say, thank you for that recommendation and nothing changes, then you know you don't have influence. And so the bigger the opportunity, the more politics plays into it, and the less the written criteria matters and more the unwritten criteria matters.
I'm going to stay the weeds one more time, then we're going to go to people with Patrick. As you think about bookings, targets, and therefore pipeline coverage, let's assume we actually have now gotten data, we've gotten infrastructure, and we're actually tracking all this stuff. You eventually find your way to, I know it's market and product dependent, but I would love you to share what you used as if our pipeline to bookings has to be more than 1x, more than 1x most of the time. That's question one, two-parter, sorry. Does sales own getting bookings to turn into revenue? Self-serving, because I was at a board meeting last week at this long debate about, but I hired you to bring in revenue and you're only talking about bookings. Two-part question, but I know both are probably near and dear and you've dealt with these things before.
Yeah, so I'll probably answer it in reverse. It all depends on how you set the sales model up and sales compensation. If you want sales to be responsible for the actual flow through of revenue, you probably should make their compensation attached to that. So usually if you want to understand why something happens and it's maybe what you do want or you don't want, follow the money. It's amazing how that happens. My view is I want a complete salesperson in most of the companies I'm seeing and involved with. What does that mean? I want somebody who understands the ups and downs and the risks of the revenue they're bringing in. I also want them responsible for the revenue. Bringing on something and it churning in 9 months is really not very productive for anyone. So I think creating the right incentive model, and yes, I do think sales plays a big role in the actual revenue flow through. I was the person who developed the relationship. I was the person who bonded with that champion, as Jim pointed out. I should be the person who has to have some level of involvement of pushing it over. Am I involved in the technical implementation? No, but there are going to be critical calls in any implementation that the salesperson needs to be on with the champion and be able to say, hey, I know we've hit a roadblock. What can we do to get through this? Versus, I got the contract signed, not my problem anymore. So I think that's it. Jim pointed out a couple different things. I do think on the pipeline and the use of pipeline, I don't know if there's one answer for, hey, this is the coverage and it always works. I think you have to understand the composition of the pipeline. What stage is it at? I do think there is some benefit in using a weighted average of, hey, how much, but it depends on the time horizon. Hey, if I need to make this quarter, I really am pretty much usually uninterested with anything not at 75%. I might weight 75, the 90 differently. You also have to look at deal size. If you've got one lumpy deal in that pipeline, that can really throw the whole thing off. If it goes forward, it doesn't go forward. So to me, I was always very interested in the hygiene of the pipeline, but then the composition of the pipeline. I think Jim also brought up another good point. If you've done all of this, if all of this is there, look, Jim probably never had it happen to me. It happened to me, which is, look, the big deal you thought was going to close in the quarter goes sideways. If you have a really good disciplined pipeline, you can quickly look for what are the 5 deals in my pipeline that I could try to pull forward. And that's going to be based on medics. And if you follow the medics, you know what those 5 deals are. If you haven't, it now becomes a scramble for what's the deal to place it. Oh, shit. So I agree with you. Those things, and it takes time. Again, incentivize. Salespeople usually fight this. I always told all my bosses it was pure art, and I'm the greatest artist they've ever seen. But you've got to explain to the salespeople why this is important, why it's important for them, why it's important for the company, and have some level of incentive in there. And some of that could be a little stick and carrot for why is it important you follow through and you use these type of tools.
I see your head nodding, Jim, so I'm going to guess it's boring that we agree to each other, but y'all are both pretty damn smart. But is there something, Jim, you'd add to, or not so much take exception with, but want to elaborate a bit on?
Yeah, two things that jump to mind. One is I wholeheartedly agree with Patrick that if the salespeople don't care about what happens to the client downstream, you've got the wrong salesperson on the team. And you'll find that out. You will know pretty quickly what comes out of the sales process and goes into the delivery cycle and then what you get downstream. There's one of the salespeople that worked for me in the past. He came up with a way that he approached it was to say to his champion, as you reach the proposal stage of the process, he'd say, let's work together on the 3 slides that you're going to present to the CEO of the company in 9 months when the discussion comes up about renewal. It's time to renew the contract. Let's validate what we've achieved and why we want to continue this and potentially expand the use of this. And so writing those 3 slides helped him close the original deal because it solidified the reasons that you're doing it, but it also helped set the foundation for what the success team is now responsible for post-sale of what the client's trying to achieve and what they look at success like 9 months out.
The old write the press release for the news.
Exactly. Let's write the press release and validate it. The second thing is, as you look at pipeline, because what we did a lot was we're doing demand creation selling, we wouldn't assign dollar value to the pipeline until it met a certain stage 2 qualification criteria. So when the deal was first created, it got $0 value in the pipeline. So I didn't count, I wasn't counting on any revenue from those deals. Once it then reached a certain stage, it got dollars assigned to it. But again, it's still knowing from that stage, we get a 32% win rate over a 97-day period. Okay, so those are our KPIs in the process. If we're 45 days into the quarter and it's at stage 2, then it's a 33% chance likelihood that it will close, but it's not this quarter deal, right? Unless there's some sort of compelling event that could pull this deal forward. So that's where you have the ability to say, okay, what is the compelling event? Is it strong enough to pull it into the quarter? If so, what needs to be true for it to happen this quarter, process-wise, incentive-wise, et cetera?
Jim, I like that. Actually, the more I think about it, I wish I had used that. Like maybe deals at 10% don't get assigned a value, because I then would have to have conversations with gentlemen like Chris and my CFO on, well, why did the pipeline change? And it's like, well, I really didn't know anything at 10%. At 25%, I thought it was a $3 million deal. When I really now started the conversation, I realized it's $1 million deal. It looks like, oh my God, the sky is falling and your pipeline is shrinking. And it's like, well, no, I made bad gains. So yeah, that's actually a really good point.
Well done. Okay, so people, Patrick, you tee this up from the very beginning, and back to the art and science. Individual hiring is a bit art, but it's a rubric. I guess I just want to elevate it to sales culture. What do you look for? This is both of you, and I'll let Patrick go first. What tells you there's a sales culture in a company versus a product, let's build shit culture? We keep building stuff, and we're more of an engineering company, if you will, features functions company. And do you need to be a sales culture to be successful and scale?
Well, since CRO is in my title, of course you need sales. I think a sales culture is important. Sales cultures can get overblown. Sales cultures can go too far. But in its purest sense, a sales culture is, are we building things that are meaningful, have a place in the market, and that people want? I think if you're allowing yourself, the whole company, to ask that question, I think that's good. I've seen product departments build products that when they build it and they show it to you, you're like, who told you to build that? Like, why? And they're like, it's kind of cool. And it's like, yeah, but it has no place. It has no application. And I don't know who's going to pay for it. So I'm always a big, who's going to give you money for that? And how much money do you think they will give you? So I think sales cultures, the good ones I've seen, and look, I've been very, very fortunate. Todd Roberti, Joe and Eric. These were people who at their core wanted to please the customer. And if you want to please the customer and delight the customer, you usually will have a sales culture. If you have an insular culture, which is I want to build stuff because I think it's important, you won't have that right type of mentality. I listened to that Acquired podcast. I think you recommended, or Greg, you listen to the one about Amazon, just that constant, I want to delight type mentality builds the right culture and usually will keep it in check too, which is I don't want to overextend myself, because some sales cultures will say, I just want to sell. If you're constantly worried about, am I pleasing, it will force you to, even a sales culture, to pull back a little bit and say, I can't outrun everything else.
Yeah, I'd say similar. There's sales culture, and then there's like hyper sales culture, right? So the sales culture where you put the customer has a seat at the table and you're focused on solving a customer problem and driving value for the customer. That to me is like, okay, it's a sales culture in the sense that we are empowering the salespeople to be in front of the client to make sure we're delighting the client with the value we're bringing with the product. There's a company I've done some work for that they had a mentality that we have by far the best product. Anybody should be able to sell it. We don't really need sales and marketing because the product is so good. And they burned through a lot of money without achieving their goals. And it's largely because they didn't appreciate the fact that there's a political process that goes into buying in large companies. If you're selling a complex product, the politics of getting a deal done is a big part of the sales responsibility. And if the organization, like one of the things I note about the sales culture is when sales needs help in reassigning resources to be able to get a deal over the line, does the organization say, great, let me drop what I'm working on and run towards it? Or, damn it, you guys are prima donnas and you're always wanting all of your stuff. I have my stuff too. And then that kind of sends a message that, you're really not that interested in enabling what's necessary to get the business side
Jim,
forward.
I think you're right. How deep does the level of client engagement go? When you've got teams internally who don't want to get on a sales call, that's scary, because it's like, ultimately, wait a second, don't you want to have a voice and explain to the client all the wonderful things you do and your group does? Like, I'm inviting you to that, I think is critical. So yeah, the culture piece is a really big part of it. And I agree with Jim. I think sometimes I've met companies who are struggling on the go-to-market and struggling on the sales side. To Jim's point, they may have a good product, and it's always scary when you hear, well, they just don't get it. Well, that's not their job to get it. It's your job to help them get it. So kind of that blaming people just aren't listening or people aren't understanding, that's usually an issue of that probably is not a sales culture.
One last just sidebar observation. I don't know if it relates explicitly to this question, but it gets at the mentality of, like customer first. Someone was telling me that, they had a big outage, and there was a SaaS company. We had an outage and it was good news. We survived it. We didn't get a ton of complaints. We were down for almost an hour and I didn't really have to deal with any complaints. And I said, that's scary as hell to me. If you're down for an hour and you're the CEO of the company and no one's escalating to you that there's this outage and that you need to reprioritize resources to solve for it, then you are not an important product.
Your product may not be being used.
So that's like, what do you think about when you have an outage?
So I'm going to do a couple, I won't call it rapid fire, but kind of there's points of view. And this one I know is way longer than rapid fire, but I'm going to try it. We all are fathers and we have young people. We see what technology is doing. There's greatness and there's not so greatness. And so selling to me is an interesting conundrum for young people entering the profession. The art of the human connection. Oh, an email's fine. Give some fatherly advice, CRO advice to young salespeople or even mid-level salespeople that are kind of grown up with technology, is kind of taking the place of talking to a human. Kind of curious your thoughts on that.
I'll just hit a couple, and I agree with you. I forced my older one and I'm forcing my younger one to be a caddy, because I think there's nothing better than you'll learn how to talk to adults. You'll learn how to deal with people who maybe aren't having a good day. A couple things. I do think just trying to explain to them, people like to work with people they like. People like to do things when you are in the selling process. Sometimes you'll hit a bump. If I have a personal bond with you, I'm usually willing to push through that bump. If this is a bump that's just a technology relationship, I'm not going to push the bump. And the one tip I would say, I struggle with it is, hey, did you reach out to the prospect? Yes, I emailed them. Did they email you back? Did you call them? Well, no, I kind of feel like I did my job. And I'm like, don't view it as a checklist. View it as if you're sent something to your good friend and they didn't get back to you. Yeah, that should concern you. I should reach out and make sure everything's okay. So that would be probably the one thing, the reliance on technology. I sent an email, I sent a text, I didn't hear anything back, but I did my job.
One thing I always taught both kids is be inquisitive, ask questions, but don't just ask questions like you're cursory asking questions. Ask to learn something. If you could learn one personal thing about somebody that they care about for themselves, you have a lot better chance to sell to their company, because you don't actually sell to companies. You sell to individual people that are inside of those companies. You didn't do a deal with Amazon. You closed the deal with Mike and Mary, the two employees at Amazon who were responsible for making that decision. So you need to be very, very clear about what motivates those individual people. And it's really, really difficult to understand motivators over text and email. Like that happens in conversation.
If you think about the idea of the champion and you think about how you would want to be supported as a champion, it'll usually go the right way. I mean, I've been on the other side, inside Fortune 50 companies where there are 10 projects, but guess what? There's only room for 2. And invariably, all 10 have pretty good metrics. They're pretty close in ROI. They're pretty close. It usually wound up being the champion who argued the most ferociously for the money.
That literally cared that much, right?
They won. And if you've equipped your champion, the things Jim talked about, and that person has great confidence and also a great level of personal awareness and understanding, that they're going to push a lot harder than pretty transactional, and not a big deal if I have to tell that person no.
I can't believe how many times I see folks not go to the bottom of LinkedIn, not the top, like where you are now, how about where they went to school? I got Patrick, who has got this Villanova pullover on. They play some pretty good basketball. Maybe I ought to talk about that. It's kind of funny how these are like things, I didn't say it, kids aren't necessarily learning because no one's reminding them. So we're doing a little public service here because it's frankly a skill. It doesn't matter if you're a salesperson or you're anywhere in an organization. These are sales skills, relationship skills that matter. To your point, I think what you guys said about these are people that are buying from you, not companies. I think that's a home run piece of advice. Let me get down to something nitty gritty. Sort of, again, in the advice column of almost like it's always true. Both of you walk in these companies. Again, I don't care, frankly, if they're 10 to 50 or kind of this range of revenue. There's one thing they probably need to start doing. Maybe it's more than 10 in your mind's eye, what this company looks like. And one thing they need to stop doing. It's almost like every time I see this problem, one thing to start, one thing to stop, if you will.
I'll start with what to stop doing. Stop thinking that you know better than the client. There's almost always a they don't get it attitude. And just like at the end of the day, they get it because it's their business. And they're choosing to do business with you only if you can help them do their business better than without you. And so they just don't get it is not an acceptable way to think. And one thing you need to start doing is, this isn't a universal truth, but what you need to start doing is putting the customer at the center of the business. The very first thing that I worked on with this company that we're working on together, Chris, is map the client journey. What is the experience that the client goes through from the time they become aware until the time they unfortunately have given notice that they're terminating? And then working backwards, what are the things that work? What are the things that don't? So put the customer at the center of the process and evaluate everything you do through their eyes.
Patrick, you got a couple of those, or?
Typical. Jim's smarter than I am, so he stole mine. Mine was going to be stop guessing. I think you'll hear a lot of like, well, I think this is why we lost the deal. And it's like, if you're forensic, you'll figure out why you lost the deal, and you have to be honest about it. I do think the other part is, I sometimes struggle, and I would catch myself in this as well, is be willing to take some risks, be willing to do some different things. A lot of times, well, did you try this? Yeah, we tried it. It didn't work. Well, did you try it once? Sometimes it's execution. It's a good idea, but you executed poorly. So be willing, and to Jim's question, ask questions of yourself. and, to really try to understand the market also moves. Nothing would be more frustrating, even internally, when I would say, are we going to get that SOC 2 approved, or we have to get this from a tech security standpoint? And people say, well, they never asked us that before. And I'm like, Anthem just got breached. You have to be prepared for it. So the market does change. It does shift. It does ask new questions. So, be flexible there.
But we're going to do a part 2 because we got exits we didn't get to. We got the annoying boards. What makes a great board interaction, an annoying one. I know you guys have tons to add there, but I'm going to bring it to a close with the question I ask everyone. And I think you both have interesting perspectives. I call it the when I was 25. We kind of talked about our kids a little bit here, but it's not the regret. It's not something you regret. It's simply, if I knew then what I know now, and we'll try and keep it professional. So I'll go to Patrick first. Talk from a professional perspective.
Somehow Jim's already stolen mine, but first I would say there's this thing that's going to come along called Bitcoin. You're never going to understand it. You still won't understand, but just invest in it. So that would probably be one. Look, it's funny. I knew, on some of the other podcasts you asked this question. I think listen more. When I was 25, I was so concerned about people thinking I'm smart, people thinking I know what I'm doing. You're untested. So I think there would be points where clients would be saying important things to me. And I was thinking about, how am I going to sound so smart? Because everybody wants to buy from somebody so smart. And the answer is somebody wants to buy from somebody who's concerned about their welfare. So probably being better at listening. But then Jim hit on it early. There are good deals and there are bad deals. Declaring a deal is bad, a deal is dead, a deal is not going to work is so critical. But when I was 25, I wanted to keep every deal alive on life support. And I'd keep them on life support, even though it was draining valuable time, energy, and resources from really good deals that I could have made more money.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, this one you actually did steal my thunder, Patch, because I was going to say, buy Apple stock. It's funny that I'll give you 2 answers, Chris, because I think there's a relevance here. I look back and I look at some of the deals that I closed or my team closed when I was a leader, and I was super impressed with the company that as we went through the process of selling to that company. And in retrospect, I should have bought the stock of those companies. One of them was Apple. We sold a deal when I was at LivePerson to Apple. I was super impressed with the leadership there. I had a decision to make. I bought a stock other than Apple. In retrospect, not a good decision. So, if you're selling to companies, as you evaluate selling to them, evaluate what the company's like and put money into good companies, invest in them. I like actually being able to say to clients, I was really impressed with this process. By the way, like after the fact, you don't want to do it beforehand because it's absurd. But, just for what it's worth, I invested a little bit of money in your company because I think what you guys are doing is really impactful and I want to be part of your journey. And I also think, Pat, to your point earlier, like that's a way that you build a relationship that is independent of the business relationship that you have. And then second is, and this, by the way, gets to dealing with boards, gets to dealing with executive management, whatever level you're in, good news early, bad news earlier. I can't tell you how many times we took time trying to figure out how best to frame a bit of bad situation for the board, for executive management, for sales management. And in fact, the best thing to do would be to say, this happened. This is what I know about it so far. This is what I'm doing to investigate it. This is what I'm doing to try and fix it. But you need to know this information at the earliest possible moment. And I should have been better at that earlier in my career.
Well, those are 2 excellent. Listen more. And on the last one there, the point you just made, Jim, it's just so obvious when you look back, these things. And I think you also, on your first one, the Peter Lynch, now I'm dating myself, Fidelity Investments, his adage was walk the mall, see what people are buying. It's like, now everyone thinks they can measure it online, but there is a human behavior aspect of what you just said about, do you want to work at the company or buy the company stock? There's something to both. You guys are full of amazing wisdom, not full of you-know-what, truly. So I can't wait for the audience to dig in, and I'm serious about doing a part 2 because I think there's so much more to get. But Jim Dicso, Patrick O'Keefe, it's been my pleasure to talk to you guys about go-to-market, art science, and I will give a shout out to your cats and my Spartans. Hopefully we'll surprise a little bit of the early season pundits.
It's been a tough first couple of months.
Yeah, let's stay positive. Let's stay positive.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. A special thanks to this week's guest for sharing their time and insight. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners Network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again.